Hello, I'm Lionel Johnson, Professor of Practice of International Relations at the Maxwell School of Syracuse University, and I want to thank the organizers of the USA at 250 series for inviting me to participate in this important milestone event for not only the United States of America, but for our institution. I want to talk today from the vantage point of a professor who works with a range of students from the United States and around the world, and have just completed a semester, and particularly a new course on United States foreign policy. So this is a timely opportunity for me to give some reflections on this milestone in the history of the country. This is a country whose promise I have always believed in, and it's a country that I have had the privilege and the honor of serving in both Washington and abroad. But it is a country that is also at a critical inflection point. It's been 2.5 centuries since 56 men signed a document in Philadelphia declaring that a new nation had the right to exist, and more ambitiously, that all human beings are endowed with certain inalienable rights. That's an extraordinary claim. It was extraordinary in 1776, and it remains extraordinary today, because it means that from the very first day, the United States defined itself not as a country, but as an idea about how human beings should be governed. And that idea has shaped everything about how America relates to the rest of the world. I'd like to today speak about what that relationship looks like at 250 and what comes next. And as I begin this lecture, I'd like to acknowledge the obvious. While we are speaking today, the United States is engaged in active military operations in the Middle East, now in their 8th week. I would be dishonest to talk about America's role in the world and then pretend that this isn't happening in the background. But what I want to do today is something more ambitious than commentary on current events. I want to step back and look at the longer arc. And then I want to step forward to question what I think matters the most at this moment. And that question really is, what comes after this moment? Not as an abstract theory, but as a practical challenge that the next generation will own. Over the course of the last 250 years, there have been 3 tensions that have shaped the United States and its role in the world. And to understand where we're going, you need to understand where we've been. So let me offer a quick tour. Not a chronological survey, but a look at 3 tensions that have been present in American foreign policy from the very beginning of the Republic. These are problems that had gotten solved, but they're permanent features of the American experiment, and each generation has answered them differently. Understanding how they were answered and why the answers kept changing is the key to understanding the choices ahead. The first tension, I would say, is engagement versus restraint. George Washington's farewell address in 1796 was the first major foreign policy statement in American history. And what did Washington say? He warned against, quote, entangling alliances, unquote. He counseled that the new republic should take advantage of its detached and distant situation from Europe. He argued that America should trade with everyone, but commit to no one. And for most of the 19th century, that worked. The 2 oceans were a formidable barrier. The Continental Project, westward expansion, the Civil War, and then industrialization absorbed the nation's energies. And the first major pivot came in 1898, when the United States acquired its first overseas empire that included the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam. And suddenly, Washington's counsel didn't quite fit anymore. Woodrow Wilson took America into the First World War and then failed spectacularly to bring the country into the League of Nations. The United States Senate refused to ratify. The interwar period became one of the great experiments in restraint, and that ended badly. The lesson that most Americans took from the 1930s was that turning inward had costs, terrible costs, not just for the world, but for the United States itself. After 1945, the pendulum swung decisively in the other direction. The United States built the extensive network of alliances, institutions, and overseas commitments that we know today. They include NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the Bretton Woods institutions, the financial architecture that continues to drive the global economy, including the World Bank and the IMF. It included the United Nations, the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe after World War II, and military bases on every continent. And for 80 years, across 12 administrations of both parties, this was the consensus. Democrats and Republicans argued fiercely about priorities and tactics, but they agreed on the basic proposition that the United States had a stake in the international order, and maintaining it required sustained American engagement. That consensus is now under serious strain. And what makes this moment genuinely novel is that the pressure for retrenchment is coming from the executive branch itself. In earlier eras, the restraint position typically came from Congress or from public opinion, pushing back against an interventionist executive. Today, that dynamic has inverted. And yet, here's the paradox I want to have you hold on to. That same executive branch is conducting the largest American military operation in the Middle East in 2 decades. The second tension is values versus interests. The Declaration of Independence was, at its core, a statement of universal values. All men are created equal. It didn't say all Americans, it said all men. The founding premise of the Republic was a claim about American nature that transcended borders. That created an immediate tension for foreign policy. If the Republic was founded on universal principles, did it have an obligation to promote those principles abroad? Different generations have answered that question differently. Woodrow Wilson thought so. His 14 points were explicitly about reshaping the international order around self-determination. Franklin D. Roosevelt thought so. The Atlantic Charter, the Four Freedoms, and the United Nations were all built on the premise that American values should be embedded in global institutions. President Jimmy Carter elevated human rights to a central pillar of American democracy. And in the 1990s, after the Cold War ended, the idea that the United States had both the right as well as the obligation to promote democracy and human rights around the world became for a time virtually unchallenged. The opposing argument was just as old. President John Quincy Adams said it best in 1821, quote, "America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy," unquote. Our obligation was to our own citizens. The purpose of foreign policy was the protection of national interests, security, prosperity, sovereignty, and the transformation, not the transformation, of other societies. Both arguments had merit. Both had costs. The values-first approach led to overreach, interventions that didn't go as planned, commitments that stretched American resources and patience. The interest-first approach risks something different, a world in which the United States had power but no purpose, influence, but no moral authority. The question of how to balance the two was never settled. It was argued and re-argued in every administration, and it is being argued again right now. The third tension would be unilateralism versus multilateralism. It's one that I especially want to have you understand because it shapes the world that our students here at the university are about to enter professionally. After World War II, the United States did something historically unprecedented. It designed and built a network of international institutions: Bretton Woods, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, NATO, and the United Nations. These institutions existed to solve a specific problem. How does a powerful country organize a collective action and project influence without maintaining a permanent imperial apparatus? The answer was through institutions, alliances, international law, and shared rules. American power was exercised through these mechanisms, and it was legitimized by them. But America always had an ambivalent relationship with these institutions it had created. As I said earlier, the U.S. Senate refused to join the League of Nations. Congress blocked ratification of the International Criminal Court, and the United States periodically withheld funding from the United Nations. Even during the height of American interventionism, there was always a current of resistance to the idea that American sovereignty should be constrained by institutions, even ones America designed. Today, that current has become more prominent. The United States has withdrawn from a number of international organizations and treaties. The Agency for International Development, or USAID, which for 60 years was the primary vehicle for American development assistance, is no longer operating in its traditional form. And here is the question this raises, and it's the question that sets up everything I want to say next. If you reduce the mechanisms through which you project power and organize cooperation, but you still want to influence the world, what do you replace them with? So next I want to turn to what I call the costs of turning inward. I want to make an argument I think it's essential for the rising generation to grapple with. Turning inward has costs. It had costs in the 1930s, and it has costs now. Not because American engagement is always wise or always successful, it isn't, but because the world does not stand still when America steps back. The world moves on. Here is what happens when the world's most powerful country signals that it no longer is interested in maintaining the system that it built. Other countries adapt. They find new partners. They build new institutions. They hedge their bets. China has been doing this for 2 decades. The Belt and Road Initiative, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the Global Development Initiative. These are frameworks for cooperation that gives countries a reason to engage with Beijing. Whatever their flaws, they represent an offer. A country that shows up with a plan and resources will always be more attractive than a country that tells its partners to fend for themselves. Look at what's happening now. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil supply passes, has been effectively closed for over a month. Countries that depend on that oil have been told that securing it is not primarily Washington's responsibility. Put yourself in the position of a country leader who had just heard that. If you're Japan, if you're India, South Korea, or Germany, your economy depends on energy that flows through that strait. You've been told that the country that once guaranteed access no longer considers it a priority. What do? You start looking for alternatives. You diversify your energy sources. You deepen relationships with other suppliers. You build security arrangements that don't depend on Washington. You hedge. And once countries start hedging, it's very, very hard to bring them back. It's the credibility problem. This leads to a second cost that's even harder to repair, and that is the loss of credibility. International credibility is not about being liked. It's about being predictable. When allies can count on your commitments, they build their security around them. And when they cannot, they build around something else. The NATO alliance has been the foundation of European security for 75 years. And the signal from Washington in recent months is that American commitment to NATO is now being subject to reassessment. And whether or not any formal change follows, the signal has been received. And every defense ministry in Europe is now doing contingency planning for a world in which the American security guarantee looks different. That planning, once started, takes on a life of its own. European countries that invest in independent defense capabilities need the United States less. And countries that need you less are countries that listen to you less. That's an irony here. One stated goal of recent policy shifts is to get allies to spend more and to do more for their own defense. And that is happening. But the unintended consequences is that those allies, once they built independent capabilities, have less reason to follow Washington's lead on anything else. Let me put this in the simplest terms that I can. Power comes in two forms: the ability to compel people to do what you want, and the ability to persuade them to want what you want. Military and economic power can compel. They can impose costs. They can deter. But they cannot, by themselves, create the kind of sustained partnerships that make a country genuinely influential over time. For 80 years, the United States was extraordinarily good at persuasion, not because America was perfect, far from it, but because the institutional structure, the alliances, the multilateral organizations, the development programs, the educational programs provided countries a reason to cooperate with Washington, even when they disagreed with specific policies. When you reduce the institutions of persuasion, but retain the ambition to lead, you're left with a megaphone, but no microphone. You can make demands, but you can't have a conversation. And in a world where most countries, especially the middle powers and smaller states that make up most of the international system, are asking who is the best partner rather than who is the strongest power, the ability to have a conversation is what matters most. Everything I've said so far is about the problem. Now, I want to talk about the opportunity, because here is what I believe. The world has not given up on the United States, not yet at least. Because when I talk to practitioners and diplomats from other countries, and I do regularly, what I hear is not so much hostility. It's disappointment. They are not rooting for America to fail. They're waiting to see whether America will show up again. And that distinction matters. Disappointment means the door is still open, but it won't be open forever. The problems the world faces, climate, pandemics, nuclear proliferation, supply chain fragility, cannot be solved without the United States at the table. Other countries know this, and they may be hedging, they may be building alternatives, but they also know that no alternative they can build will work as well as one that includes the world's largest economy and most capable military. They need us to come back. The question is whether we will. And the window for demonstrating that America can be a constructive partner, not just a powerful one, is not unlimited. And the people who will determine whether that window stays open are not in the White House at this moment. They are the next generation of practitioners, scholars, and citizens. Whoever occupies the Oval Office, and whatever party, whichever ideology, will inherit a specific set of problems. Let me name 5 that I think matter the most. The first, rebuilding institutional capacity. The Foreign Service of the United States, my first home in Washington, has been significantly reduced. As I said earlier, USAID no longer operates in its traditional form. The interagency process, the mechanism through which different parts of our government coordinate on foreign policy, has been strained. Institutional knowledge has walked out the door. You can't just flip a switch and restore all of that. It takes years to recruit, to train, and to deploy people with the expertise to represent the United States effectively abroad. Second, restoring allied confidence. America's allies are hedging. They are building independent capabilities, diversifying partnerships, and planning for a future in which the American security guarantee may look different. And restoring their confidence will require not just words, but sustained, predictable behavior over time. That means showing up, honoring commitments, being present in the institutions that allies value, even when it is inconvenient. Third, competing in the cooperation race. And here's a concept I'd like you to remember. Scholars that are now studying Southeast Asian countries and how they choose between the United States and China have found something counterintuitive. The winner in contested regions won't be the one who wins the competition. It will be whoever is best at cooperation. Most countries are not asking who is the strongest. They're asking, who helps me solve my problems? Who shows up with resources, with frameworks, with institutional support? The next U.S. administration will need a credible answer to that question. Fourth, managing the economic transition. For decades, the United States championed open markets and global trade. That era appears to be over, not just here, but globally. Tariffs, sanctions, supply chain controls, and energy leverage are now the primary instruments of economic statecraft. The challenge is to use those tools strategically without destroying the trading relationships that make the American economy strong. Economic nationalism can protect industries, but it can also raise prices, reduce consumer choices, and alienate the partners that you need for everything else. Fifth, addressing the crises that won't wait. Climate-driven displacement, pandemic preparedness, food security, nuclear proliferation. These problems do not care about American domestic politics. They require collective action, and collective action requires the kind of institutional infrastructure that has been allowed to atrophy. the next administration will face these challenges with fewer tools than any of its recent predecessors. And why does all this matter to the next generation? I want to be direct with you about why I'm making this argument. Many of those coming up now are thinking about careers in public service, in international affairs, in policy. Some will end up working in the government, some in international organizations, some in the private sector, in civil society, or in journalism. All of them will be operating in the landscape I've just described. And here is what I want them to understand. They are not inheriting a finished system. The post-1945 order, in its original form, is not coming back. But neither is the current moment permanent. What comes next will be built, piece by piece, by practitioners working in specific contexts with specific constraints. The next generation are the architects. So what do they need? Let me offer 4 propositions. First, they should understand economics. Economic statecraft is now the primary instrument of foreign policy. The current Middle East conflict is, among other things, a global energy crisis. Oil above $100 a barrel, gas above $4 a gallon. Anyone who does not understand how energy markets, trade flows, and financial systems work will not understand how power works in the 21st century. Second, learn to work without a convener. For 80 years, the United States was the country that called the meeting, set the agenda, and provided the infrastructure for collective response. That role is being vacated. The next generation of practitioners will need to work in settings where the United States is one partner among many, or absent entirely. Third, build relationships that cross boundaries. The traditional silos, government, international organizations, the private sector, civil society, are breaking down. The people who will be effective in the coming landscape are those who can move between all of those. The problems that we face do not respect boundaries, and neither should a serious career. Fourth, get comfortable with ambiguity. The old system had the virtue of clarity. You knew the institutions, you knew the rules. The emerging system has no such clarity, and the people who thrive will be those who can make decisions without a playbook, who can tolerate uncertainty and build frameworks even as they stand on them. Allow me to close with this. The Republic's first 250 years produce a foreign policy tradition rich enough to contain both Washington's restraint and Franklin Roosevelt's ambition, Harry Truman's institution building, and the present moment's contraction. That tradition included fierce arguments about what America owes the world and what the world owes America. Those arguments were never settled, and I would suggest that's a feature, not a bug. A country that stops arguing about its role in the world has stopped taking that role seriously. So the question for the next generation is not which tradition to restore. It's what new synthesis the world requires. And the answer to that question will not come from a strategy, document, or a speech, or a lecture. It will come from the accumulation of choices made by people who took the time to understand what came before and had the courage to build something different. The United States, at 250, is neither a finished product nor a failing one. It's an ongoing one, and the next chapter is still being written. Thank you very much.